Okay, we have, I believe, 7 or 8 presenters today. You're going to get 4 minutes for those of you who are presenting. That includes time to get onto the computer. So if you have some PowerPoint or something that you're going to thrill us with, you better come up while somebody else is talking and quietly put it on the computer. Okay. At 4 minutes, I'm just going to give you a hatchet chop and you're going to be done talking. You can spend that 4 minutes any way you want to. You can talk for 2 minutes and invite questions for 2 minutes or whatever you want to do. Okay? So, and we're just going to go in the order. Pam Luke is here. Pam, you are our leadoff hitter. Okay. These ideas can be really serious or they can be wacky. We use this little panel over here. Let's see. Press here to operate the system. This is one of those super fast lightning computers, one of the new.
Reboot.
Is that?
No, I don't know.
Oh, don't scare me like that. Okay. Now, if you're using the Tech PC, and it should, within the next 10 minutes, be projected. Okay. On your mark, get set, go.
Whoa.
It's a Panasonic.
It's still.
I know. Let's talk Panasonic.
Oh, is it? It's not projecting right yet? Okay.
It's thinking about it.
Okay. So I wanted to start out with this kind of dicey question. What is the purpose of school? I'm actually not going to ask because I have a lot of ideas. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of these when people say, well, what is the purpose of school? And none of us can agree. So the next question I want to ask is, what if the purpose of school was self-actualization? And self-actualization, as defined by me instead of Maslow, is becoming the person you were meant to become and changing the world in the way that only you can. Because I believe that each of us have that capacity. Every student that passes through every public school has that capacity. And I think that's what we were sent here to do. So why not design schools to help us in that process? To do things like this. Or maybe you have a student that grows up to do this. Or something like this. It could be anything. And I think that what allows us to do that and make our change in the world is not by always all learning the same thing, but learning what speaks to us and what makes us different. So the idea is, in schools today, I think we do a fantastic job of building a foundation and making sure that everyone knows the same thing and that they can be successful in a certain way. However, as you can see, there's nothing very exciting about building a foundation. And I think kids recognize that. The only exciting thing is when you build something on top of it. So that's what I propose to do. So in schools, I think we should continue to build a knowledge base. So kind of that idea of teaching everyone the same skills that they need to succeed in the world. And then adding on to that, interest-based learning. And inviting students to study what they really love. That could be done in a variety of ways. Some of those are listed here, and there are definitely more. But the main idea is giving students autonomy over what they would like to learn, so that they can learn things that are truly interesting to them and that they're really good at. For example, in kindergarten, students could participate in a read-aloud of their choice. That would take up about 13% of their total learning time. The rest would be spent on a knowledge base. But as you get closer to 9th grade, it would be about half and half. So half of the day they're building a knowledge base, and the other half they're spending on things that they really love. Another issue this brings up is how do we cover that knowledge base in the time that we have in school, since that's kind of all we get done right now. The idea is to create a curriculum continuum. So instead of placing skills and content in certain grade levels, placing them on a continuum that kids can go across as fast or as slow as they would like to, as makes sense for them. So my last question is, what would the world be like if the purpose of school was self-actualization? maybe it
You have another minute if you
So I have a
would like to
question.
entertain questions.
Yes, please.
So you see this oftentimes like New York City, you've got these high schools that are very much acting or,
Right.
so does that go, like, I know it's not the research in there, but would that go into like what you're looking at, something kind of like that?
We would definitely study those models and see what we can learn from them. But the idea is for students to come in and be able to study whatever they want. So
In
we
any
wouldn't
school.
necessarily specialize.
Okay.
Yeah. So, good question. Yeah.
How would the curriculum continuum affect how we currently split kids into grade levels, and what would that look like in a classroom with a teacher?
Right. I think what would happen is you would still kind of get these groups that would emerge that are kind of going along at the same pace, and then, well, I think what would happen is the normal curve, because we're dealing with humans, right? And so you could create groups from the middle and then kind of help the kids at the bottom and the top more on a more individual basis.
So multiple ages in one class.
Right, could be. Yeah, just
Okay.
depending on what level makes sense to you.
4 minutes. Pam?
Usually around 5.
Oh, I didn't show them the last slide. Yeah, so that's where all my thoughts are. It's really,
Will you email that out to us?
It's really awesome.
it's really ugly right now. You're welcome to browse around.
Email us that link.
Okay.
I'm proud of Pam. She led off. She did a great job. 2 years ago, she would have frozen like a deer in the headlights. And so she is growing so much. Okay, are you ready to go? I love it.
I'll ever be.
Okay, on your mark, get set, go.
Apparently I still can't see my notes, which is disconcerting. So sequential art, I believe, is a neglected companion to mainstream teaching. To give a definition of what sequential art is, it's juxtaposed pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence, intended to convey information and or to produce an aesthetic response in the viewer. And this is from Scott McCloud in his book of Understanding Comics. And so what I want to propose is using sequential art as alongside textbooks as almost not a replacement, but a way of introducing material to learners. So I looked up some information, what is out there now. I kind of grouped it into two areas. There are cartoon and graphic novels that deal with core subjects that help instruct learners by introducing them to material, such as this one here, the Manga Guide to Physics and Cartoon Guide to Statistics. While this one has a stronger narrative and better character development, this one just seems to kind of add a cartoon element as it's teaching. T-minus is a conglomeration or a mixture of historical facts as well as dealing with science and talking about the race to the moon and how America was racing Russia. And Mouse is a historical narrative that teaches about the Holocaust and interviews a Holocaust survivor. And these over here, I feel like we're separated from the core subjects by being something that could help encourage literacy or provide a more human development interest for young readers, such as Persepolis is a story about a young girl who grew up in Iran during the Islamic Revolution and how her life was changed going through that growing process. This is American-Born Chinese is a story about a young boy who's Chinese, grows up in America. Also, another narrative is in it about a young boy who has Chinese relatives, and it kind of discusses that cultural interaction that goes on there. And then there's Bone, that is a great fiction story that just kind of encourages people who are young children, perhaps, or even readers who are older, who may not be interested in literacy or reading, can be introduced to it through this sort of medium. So I felt like when we have so many topics out there, there needs to be a development of a format to help best encourage learning. And so there's two approaches. Topic, you go from your topic into a narrative, but by introducing a narrative and tacking on like the cartoon guides to statistics that I found, there was a weaker story or no story at all, and there's no real learner attachment or involvement with the narrative or characters. However, if a book comes from the approach of a narrative and introduces the topic after introducing a story and characters that the learner can then attach to, they develop an emotional attachment, and then the material is introduced, and they hopefully are encouraged in their motivation to continue on. This is one book I found that does a great job of employing both a strong narrative and great characters, and then at the end of each chapter there's additional learning material. So here's our story that talks about the development of an eye and a character who goes on a quest to find his master's eye that he lost, and he meets Charles Darwin, and they talk about natural selection, gene pools, population, and a lot of other elements of science that learners can be introduced to. And then after they've had this great experience, they can then go on and learn and read more, like, oh, I was interested about the mythos behind what he was talking about with the eye of the Magic Sisters, or the development of gene pools. So these are some of the perceived advantages I feel sequential art brings to an educational perspective. If there's a strong narrative, it provides motivation for the learner, it provides visual representation that can help encourage memory, as well as giving a context and multi-subject integration within a single medium. And it's more easily navigable, I feel, than if you have it in a story.
That was a wonderful 4 minutes that you gave us. Tyler? While, let's see, the next person is Kyle Welch. Did you make it? Yep. Now, while he's getting on the podium, one of the things to be aware of, these have been pretty good, pretty darn good, PDG. And that's technical talk, but an instructional designer learns after a while. There is a McKay School activity coming up where I believe you'll be able to give your elevator talk in 2 minutes. All of the ones that are given today will be candidates to take part in that competition. I wish Charles was here. He could tell us more about what the plans are. And then there is one at the university level also, where the winners from the McKay School of Education will go and compete against all of the other colleges in the university. So this is kind of fun, isn't it? Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, this is not an idea of my own that I'm presenting. This is something that I read recently and have been thinking a lot about and don't know very much about it. And so I want to share it for maybe 2 minutes and then hear your professional opinions on it. Just regarding its validity or possibility. Let's see. Okay, this was from our good friend Clayton Christensen from the Harvard Business School. Earlier this year, he made this statement. In 15 years from now, half of universities may be in bankruptcy. And in the end, I'm happy to see that happen. Talked about the role of online education in that, and I need to note this is not a reiteration of the fear of MOOCs disrupting universities widespread. In fact, Clay says that MOOCs fall very much within the same business model of delivering their services as universities. He says that the most disruptive online providers right now are the ones that focus in, they hone in on bridging the gap between higher education and employers, where students can receive an education that effectively prepares them for their careers, and they are not paying for a tuition that is in the tens of thousands of dollars because they're helping fund football stadiums or all the extra costs of the traditional university financial model. Just want to throw this idea out there. What comments, questions, insights, insults do you have to offer?
Well, I think one of the things, I remember this presentation when he came, one of the things he talked about is that what higher education needs to become in the future is more doing real, authentic work for clients perhaps, or in partnership with industry, but less of learning content, which can be easily dispersed online, and more of doing project-type work. And I think that's probably true, that we'll come to universities to do our collaboration, to do our projects, but maybe not to learn our content.
Yeah, super interesting. Along those lines, Google did a study. They looked at the data of everyone they've hired in the last 10 years. They looked at their college GPA and their standardized test scores, among other things, and they looked at their performance, progress, their success within the company, ran some regressions on it, and they found zero correlation between their GPA and test scores and their success at Google. I think that's interesting. That's not saying that college, university experience does not have benefits, because it obviously does, but there's a gap there that we can be addressing, and I think Rick's comments are very in line with that. Is there time for another comment
Yes,
or question?
you have another full minute.
Okay.
What was the other source, or where did you find that information? I'm just curious to read more about it.
Oh, the Google information? Yeah. It was an article. I can send it to you. I'll read it.
I just posted something in our Google Plus community on Pam's thing. A lot of these, it seems like 4 minutes isn't enough, so maybe everyone can go into Google Plus and continue this conversation. We can have threads on each of these presentations.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Just in short, two groups that he mentioned, Clay mentioned as particularly disruptive: Intel University and GE Crotonville, because they are focusing specifically on bridging the gap. Thank you.
Annika, you're next. While she's getting ready, your idea is very valid. You know that the CLO magazines that keep appearing down there on the table are an evidence of the kind of thing that you're talking about. I'm reading a book now about the future of the university, the globalization of universities. Right now, there are enterprises going on where universities are scrambling for their existence. Now, BYU is not. BYU will continue to be BYU.
Perhaps because of our mentoring focus. Maybe we're ahead of the game a little bit because of our focus on collaboration and authentic project work and stuff like that.
Probably because we have 15 brethren in Salt Lake City who want it to go on. They have a whole different purpose in mind for this university. They want it to become the center of learning, and they want it to become a place where young, bright people come to prepare to go out into the world, somewhere besides Utah, and make contributions and live exemplary lives.
Outside of Utah.
Outside of Utah, that's right. Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, and
Outside of northern Idaho too.
And you can forget about New Mexico. It's just like
All right.
that's savings.
My basic question here is based on an idea of how do we communicate language proficiency. I'm sure a lot of you have some second language talent, but how do you let people know how well you speak or understand that language? A friend of mine came up on Facebook yesterday saying, I'm bothered that I feel I need to support my French proficiency with more than the fact that I'm certified to teach it. He thought telling that to people doesn't tell them anything about what he can or can't do. And then I looked at my husband's resume. He's fantastic at his second language, but how do you say that on a resume? He says, well, I'm a native bilingual speaker of English and Spanish, professional level of Mandarin Chinese. If you're an employer and you see that, how do you know what that means? He throws some test results on there: oral proficiency, superior, reading and writing score, advanced, advanced plus. But unless you are really well versed in that field and know what he's talking about, you have no idea what this means about his actual language capacity. And so thinking about that, I want to bring in some really old ideas. How do we teach and assess language? Let's start over here in the 1970s and 80s and look at something that came to us called mastery learning. Mastery learning was an idea that instead of holding time constant and letting achievement vary, we held achievement constant and letting the time that students take to reach that achievement vary. Let them relearn and retest until they get up to a certain criterion. We got some little remnants of this kind of idea. This is a pretty popular text now, criterion reference language testing, the idea of testing the criteria rather than a norm reference or something that varies according to the population. But we're still stuck with test programs. This is an example from the HSK, which is a Chinese proficiency test, that are still way back 50 years ago, where we've got certain levels you take and you pass, and it tells us absolutely nothing about the criteria required. If you looked at that and tried to see, okay, I scored this, what does that mean? You know absolutely nothing about what that person can do with the language. So instead of just thinking about language, let's think about how we teach and test and assess in the 21st century. And one of the most compelling new ideas for me is the idea of open badges, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with because they came from the technology field. And there's even some efforts to get badges into the linguistic field. And we have this project known as the Badges for Language, which is a pretty great framework. They have it set up, it's standard over a huge variety of languages. It's got a standard set of criteria. But the problem with the Badges for Language system right now, it's standard, it's great, it's open, but it's pretty vague. For example, you get To this level, it means you can understand a wide range of demanding longer text to recognize the meaning. These are things that you can only assign really subjectively, and it's a little bit ad hoc. It's for a language teacher to say, okay, my student can perform at about a C1 level, take this badge and move on. So what can we do to make this framework of badges and this idea about criterion reference testing and letting students learn to mastery rather than just take a certain course and receive a certification, how can we put that into the 21st century? So this is a little mock-up of mine. What if we taught and designed with badges? What if we had our educational objectives, each and every one of them, tied to a specific demonstratable badge, and the students worked not just until they had heard the information and taken a test, but until they had attained, let's say, a 90% mastery level on each individual criteria, and only move on in the curriculum when they really have mastered it. So let's say this is a page of a workbook or an online module where it says this is what you're going to be able to do and apply after you have mastered the material in this unit. I would like to see something like this really brought to life. I don't have enough time left in my particular PhD education, but I'd love to see something like this come about, and I'd like to see what those of you out there who have similar experience and ideas would think about that.
You have marvelous timing.
Is that exactly right? I'll put this presentation on the Google+.
Yeah, would all of you who have something that you'd like to put up, Rick, would you be a good person to collect those?
If you're not already on the community. But yeah, in the community we've got a section called Thoughts and Discussions. You can just create your discussions there.
That's super cool. Okay, our next presenter is Keith Proctor.
I'm not going to use a PowerPoint presentation, so
That's
get
a
little bit
strike
more time.
against you right away.
I did this a little while ago. My name's Keith Proctor. I'm a PhD student, and currently I'm exploring how college students experience their failures, their learning failures here at college. And it's been an exciting kind of field, and I want to talk a little bit about that here. A few days ago, Richard Collada gave the Honored Alumni Lecture, and in it he gave some imperatives for learning, as in his role right now they're working to get classrooms connected to the internet. And he said it's a good thing, but it could also be a really bad thing if we don't do these certain imperatives. And one of them, which I find really fascinating, is adaptive instruction. That idea has been around for like ever, 40, 50 years, but not much has changed in terms of the discourse. What has changed is the technology to assess. And really, if you're talking about adaptive instruction, you're talking about reacting to student responses. So a student performs somewhere, gives some sort of response in the computer, and then the computer tries to adapt the instruction to meet the needs of that student. Basically, assessment is the process of soliciting and measuring student responses. We do a pretty good job of assessing correctness of a response, and we do that by measuring it against some ideal or correct response. We don't do a really good job of assessing incorrect responses. It's marked wrong, and we move on. If the student gets the feedback, maybe they can do something about it, maybe not. Teachers really don't have a whole lot of time to go back and work with these students on their failures. And so we right now are trying to understand the nature of failed student responses, and that's key to adapting the instruction to help these students. It's also key to helping the students adapt to the instruction that's being given to them if the instructor is not able to adapt it themselves. So what I find to be true is that understanding learning failure experiences is going to be key to improving adaptive instruction strategies and content. Learning failures are content and context dependent, meaning they don't typically generalize to other contexts. So we have to assess not only the correctness of student responses, but also the incorrectness of the responses, and then find ways to adapt the instruction accordingly. So all I'm here to say is I think we need more research into how students experience these failures, because I believe that there's a lot of affect that comes from these failure experiences that guide students to either learn the material or walk away from it, to develop this conception of their identity of being capable in a certain area, or I'm just not good at math, or I can't write. And I just don't believe that. My two imperatives for myself and in this program are, number one, if you have enough time and sustained interest, you can learn anything. And number 2, as eternal beings of our Heavenly Father, our mission here on earth is to continue to develop and perfect ourselves until we become like Him. So my work, my research right now focuses on that, and I'd like to hear any comments or questions you have about this area of research and learning failure experiences. In the back, Pam Luke.
It sounds like you're advocating for more formative assessment and less maybe summative.
I'm definitely asking for more formative. This type of assessment has to be formative. Yeah. But summative is important too.
There is a literature on this topic.
There is. A lot of the literature that I found focuses on the K-12 situation, not so much at college. And so I'm currently working at the college level.
Same ideas can apply. I mean, the techniques for doing it, item response theory provides a vehicle for doing it.
Yeah, and it is. There's these different disparate parts of the literature that kind of tie into this idea of learning failure experiences, so it's worth exploring. Anyway, that's it.
It is worth exploring. Good job.
If you need to do your case study, right?
You know,
You can't fail.
the saying goes that nothing so focuses a man's mind as the fact that he's going to be shot in the morning. 4 minutes is a short time to get your ideas together, isn't it? And to present them. You're doing well, and this is a good exercise for us. So, Janelle, you're next. This is, by the way, a good practice for giving conference presentations.
Normally I have more time to prepare for something like that. My name is Janelle. I am coming with an idea, well, with an initiative I'd like to introduce you to that I'm working on with a group of interdisciplinary students. Some of them are based out of the business building and elsewhere on campus. Right now, we've noticed that there are a lot of people on BYU campus that are interested in improving education on BYU campus and elsewhere, but the student feedback infrastructure, rate your professor at BYU, it just doesn't really cut it. It doesn't allow them to participate or to share their voices in a way that they would like to. And so this year, this group of students is working in collaboration with the Ballard Center based out of the business building to bring just one of their ideas to life. And we will be going through an ideation phase in just discussing what the issues are and what our ideas are, what is already being done, and evaluating those and then prioritizing those, and then just choosing one. And in that ideation and evaluation phase, we will be working with a network of students, of course, BYU departments, and then also expanding outward with other exemplary organizations that have model programs of learning and teaching in their organizations, and educational consulting firms as well. And the success this year will provide the foundation for the sustainability of our group so that it can expand to include more projects than just this one project and more students who want to participate. And my intention in bringing this initiative to you is to invite you to participate. We would love your ideas, your feedback, and whatnot. So come and talk to me afterwards. Does anyone have questions? Yeah.
Are you focused on improving education in general at BYU or specifically improving teaching at BYU?
Well, we will only be able to focus on one project. And so that one project that we narrow in on will be very defined. Right now, we are open to ideas, for teaching or for, just various, we're just comprehensive in what we're interested in at the moment, but we will define it. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
All right. Fred?
Can you give me a 2-minute?
A 2-minute warning. I'll clear my throat or something like that.
In order for me to present my idea, I first need to review the processes used in making microelectronics. And I'm sure there are several experts here in the field, but let me give you a quick intro to that. Layers are placed on some kind of a substrate material and then printed, alternating conductive layers with non-conductive layers. And in between these layers, there are holes or passageways where these can be interconnected, and they could be connected around the edges. This is obviously two-dimensional. If you imagine a three-dimensional layer like that, you may have a printed circuit that goes around, and there's a pad here for a computer chip or something like this. You may have a wraparound to the backside or to a different layer, or you may have an opening in this non-conductive layer that allows you to print and connect the multiple layers together. This can be done with a variety of printing processes. Historically, that was the way it was done. It's now done in various atmospheres where very tiny micro or nano layers of precious metals are plated through pressure and temperature and all of these kinds of things. So with that background, I'd like to present an idea to you that perhaps learning could be considered a series of conductive layers where some concept is added to what I already have. In other words, I go to class, I get up in the morning, I have an experience, and my brain gets printed, or my being receives another layer because of that experience. And the key is, how is that new layer going to be interconnected with the layers that already exist? Maybe I'm going to be stubborn, and I'm not going to accept an interconnection between other layers or previous learnings. Or maybe I'm going to code it with a non-conductive layer that inhibits the connections on future learnings. Or maybe there's some habits, or maybe it's the way the learning is presented. It's in such a way that I cannot easily create an interconnection to lower layers or other layers. Maybe it's difficult to get down to subsequent layers. I would really like to make a connection here. In microelectronics, they actually will come through, and with a laser or a drill, they will drill down to lower layers and then maybe fill this cavity or coat the inside of that hole with a conductive layer, and thereby creating connections at various layers. If there is a path or a pad or a place that bore will penetrate. So I would suggest that, just throwing out this idea, that perhaps it's the interconnects between the layers which is key to relating one concept, one idea, one fact with other things that we might have learned in the past. And I simply throw that out to you as an idea which I have labeled layer interconnectivity in learning.
2, 1, 0. Good job. Okay, I did not prompt that. I didn't. I didn't. That was Fred's. Did you sign the permission form right away?
I didn't have any, so I hereby give my permission.
Okay.
Okay.
It's on the video. That's interesting, kind of.
That's legal, actually.
It's also
Is it really?
It's legal to bind.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about a concept that I kind of came across recently, and it's in very kind of early stages, but maybe you faced this problem before. You want to learn about something, and you kind of go about it in a really informal manner. So lately I've been really interested in learning more about user experience design. and I actually didn't know really where to start. Like, okay, what is user experience design? Where do I start? And so I emailed a friend, he kind of recommended a book to me. But I thought, man, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And probably if you go to search how to do user experience design, your first result is going to be something like wikihow.com. And I just don't trust the validity of such a result. So I'm trying to solve the question of, what's the best way to approach a topic? What kind of resources can I trust? And how can I exercise those skills that I gain in a meaningful context? So the problem is we have all these sources of really informal learning. I don't know if any of you use Codecademy, but it's really, really awesome. It's a great place to learn a lot of skills, but it doesn't take you all the way to the end of being able to learn how to code. Or you could go into this is kind of a more formal environment. You can go to a really informal environment. I work with students who learn video production, and there are so many kids who are in high school that are teaching themselves how to do video production, motion graphics, just by watching YouTube videos. They don't really see the need to go through a formal course in order to learn these things. But some people who are older, they can't handle that level of informality, and I'm being one of them. So the genesis for my idea kind of came from this quote that I was reading recently. So the complex and uneven nature of the available corpus of information is very challenging to the isolated and self-directed learner, me. Some of these problems could be addressed fairly inexpensively by developing and maintaining high-quality, carefully reviewed study guides to various subjects and disciplines. So I had this idea of what if we used the power of the internet and crowdsourcing to create an online study guide for any particular topic. And how also we leverage the power of us as instructional designers to break down what it means to be a UX designer a little bit more. Because we know that, in order to become something or go through a course, we have to kind of break it down into these little subtasks. So my idea is to have a crowdsourced online study guide about a variety of topics. Right? So, for example, it would be how to do user experience design. And then the crowd would go in and say, okay, in order to be a good user experience designer, I think you have to have knowledge of these certain things, these specific outcomes. And then we could further break those down into tasks, and then user experience designers could go on there and say, this is a really good resource, this is a really good resource that I think is going to take you to that specific outcome. And if someone puts up there a YouTube video that sucks, you could kind of use like the Reddit model and downvote it to the point where it doesn't become valid anymore. And then upon completion, and I haven't really quite sussed out the whole thing, this kind of came to me last week, is how we demonstrate that we've actually learned something. We might use like a Khan Academy model where users are actually submitting content that they create. So artifacts, once you've completed a course of study, artifacts would be submitted by the end user back up to the site, and then members of the community would be able to kind of give comments to it, vote on it, and then maybe if enough people voted, you get a badge or something like that. So that kind of remains to be seen actually how these things would be assessed. But the idea is trying to create something that's a little bit more valid, a little bit more vetted by a bigger community. So that's my idea. I don't know quite what's going to happen with it, but if you have any questions, I'll let the talk.
Got time for one question.
Yeah, Brian.
How will this scale over time? Because one technology that is valid now won't be in 5 years.
So I guess that would be the idea, kind of a Wikipedia model, that it would be able to be editable and updated. So,
What will your badge mean then?
Well, I think that the badge is maybe it would be a little bit less technologically focused and more principle focused. And that would be the idea of the outcome, is that you're demonstrating an understanding of something, right? It's kind of like the same question of what does your degree mean if you graduated 5 years ago? So it's all about having those specific outcomes and making sure that those outcomes are assessing kind of higher level behavior.
Okay.